looking at two series, if you remember. One is a Heroes of the Bible series, specifically focusing on the women of the Bible. And the second series is about the Kingdom of God. Last week, we were looking at the Kingdom of God series, and Clive was talking on that, and he was talking on the theme of the Kingdom of God over nations. Okay. Now, in his presentation and talk, what he talked about was the fact that God has control. He is in charge. Right? It presents all sorts of challenges, that concept, but God is in charge. Right? And whatever the nations do and so on, God works out his plan through it all. Now, what I want to do today is I'm going to talk about one of the heroes of the Bible. I'm going to talk about a woman called Esther. Esther is one of my personal heroes. And I'm going to share some of her story. It's a very big story, it's 10 chapters long, so there's no way I can do the whole thing justice today. But I'm particularly asked to talk about Esther because Esther is a perfect illustration of what Clive was talking about last week. So Clive's talking about the fact that God can take any situation and work through it to bring about his purpose. Okay? And we will see from the story of Esther and the short summary we've got that I'll be dealing with today that that's exactly what God did in this circumstance. Okay? Now, a couple of things before we begin. First of all, Esther's an interesting book because it never actually mentions God. Okay? God's implied, but he's never actually referred to. And very often in our lives, and in one's life, and certainly in the world as a whole, God might not be mentioned, but he's most definitely still present, and he is most definitely still doing his work. Whether people refer to him or not is irrelevant. He is there, and he is working his way. So that's an important point to remember at the beginning. The second is, I have put my chart up here. Now, this is because, at this precise moment, we haven't got a PowerPoint, otherwise it would have been on PowerPoint. This is the first half of Romans 8, verse 28. And I will be referring to this verse quite a lot. Okay? It's the NIV version. In other translations, it will be worded in a slightly different order. But this is it. Now, I need some audience participation, please, or congregation participation. And that is, whenever I turn to it, I would ask you to read it with me. Okay? And we will be reading this several times during the passage and during the sermon. So, let's have a quick practice. Okay, you all ready? So, now we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him. Okay? Now, well, there's lots more going on. We've got too long. Okay? So I will turn to this periodically, and we will say this. Okay? So, let's get back to Esther. So, who is Esther? So, Esther is a Jewess. She was born probably around Susa, which was the capital of the Persian Empire. And she was alive around about 500 BC. So there is always some dispute about the exact time. Some people say as early as or as late as 480, but around that time. Okay. Putting her into historical perspective for you, Esther was just after Daniel. So I don't know when exactly Daniel died. I don't know the date of Daniel's death. But Esther would have been born around the time that Daniel was dying. So we've done various bits about Daniel. So Daniel, prophet in Babylon, working with Nebuchadnezzar and all the rest of it. We did that whole series on Daniel. So she was being born as Daniel was dying. And for those of you who know your Bible well, later on we get Ezra and Nehemiah, and she'd have been an old woman when Ezra and Nehemiah were doing their things. Okay? So she comes in the middle there. And during this time there's a bit of turmoil because we've got the Babylonian Empire being taken over and then the next empire being taken over the top of that. And the time that she's living is around the time of a king called Xerxes. Okay? So, Hopefully that gives you a bit of historical placement for it. Now, before I go any further, I've got a lot of distractions today. I want to show you this. Okay? Now this is a cross-stitch. You might think it's a cross-stitch done by a child. It isn't. It was a cross-stitch done by a 20-odd-year-old man, about 22. Okay? And this is a cross-stitch done by a gentleman called Dwayne. A gentleman called Dwayne Callamy. Now, Dwayne was one of the very first pupils I ever taught in Wisbech. Okay? And Dwayne became a Christian and was baptised in this church and became part of this church and was involved in this for a number of years. But then in his early 20s, Dwayne had a heart attack and died. He woke up one morning actually in the process of having a heart attack and he died alone in his room. But before he died, Dwayne had given me this, okay, which shows the type of person he is. Now I'm going to use this to illustrate something at the end, the point of the sermon. Okay? So I'll come back to it, but don't forget about Dwayne, and don't forget about the cross stitch. So, when we go through life, we go through life, and today, in today's society, one of the most important things that people talk about is people being happy. But of course, life is full of challenges. Okay. And when Dwayne died at the age of 22, that was a very big challenge for us. Challenge for me personally, challenge for the church. It was quite a shock. In fact, when we got the phone call, we all disbelieved, just couldn't believe the phone call we were getting. It seemed so ridiculous. But in that, when things are challenging, this scripture often comes back to mind. So let's say it again. Now we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him. Now when a young man dies, or a baby dies, or terrible things happen, we can say this, but believing it is a totally different thing. And certainly, if I was to, when people were talking about Dwayne, and we were actually had already booked a holiday in Wales, and we went to Wales and drove all the way back for his funeral, and went back to Wales. And when we were at the funeral, the family's all saying, "What a waste! He had his whole life in front of him." It was terrible, and all the rest of it. And they certainly didn't believe this. And I'll be honest, at that time, and from time to time when the pressure's on, I struggle to believe this. Okay. But this is key. Absolute key. So, in Esther's story is, as I say, it's 10 chapters long, so I will summarise it, but I need to give you some information. So, Esther, as I said, Jewess, giving you the history, but sometime in Esther's childhood, both her parents died. Esther was left as an orphan. And the only relative she had that was close, who could redeem her, because they had kinsman redeemers out of Israel, was her uncle. And her uncle was called Mordecai. So Esther, from some age as a young girl, could have been very young, or it might have been when she was 6 or 7, was brought up by her uncle, and she lived in her uncle's household. Now, the world we're in at the moment, Xerxes is the ruler of 139 countries that have now been subsumed into the Persian Empire and are referred to as provinces. He is an incredibly powerful man. And if not the most powerful king in the world at that time, certainly up there. And he believed he could do anything. He was incredibly affluent. So, one time, just to prove that how much money he had, he decided to hold a party for half a year. and he just invited anybody who wanted to come to his palace and see how great he was by all the stuff he had. And when they came, they could have as much food as they want, they could drink what they want, and everybody was given a gold goblet, and it was a different goblet to everybody else's goblet. Just to prove that he didn't even need a set. Everybody could have an individual one. If you wanted a small one, you could have a small one, or a big one, big one. Right? And people could drink anything they wanted. The finest champagne down to a can of Coke or whatever it could. And he actually, because of all this power and so on, felt he could do anything he wanted. So his wife, who actually was a very powerful woman in her own right, they used to live, at this time, kings and queens used to live quite separate lives. And they only came together for state occasions or if the king decided he wanted to see his wife. So, one time, right at the end of this 6 months, he got drunk and he basically said, oh, in his drunken state, oh, my queen's beautiful, tell her to come here. Right? And she basically turned around and said no. Now, again, in his arrogance and his temper and in his drunken state, he then excommunicated her, put her into the harem. She was no longer a queen. Okay. So, we're now in a situation where he's ruling by himself. But again, he's king. So a year on, he gets to be framed. I've got a queen, yeah. So his advisors say, well, in which case, you're king. Just go around and round up all the most beautiful women in the 139 provinces that you have, all the youngest ones, and bring them to the palace, and then you can go through them as concubines and see which one you fancy most. And he said, well, that's a good idea. His own private brothel. Okay. So they rounded them up, and Esther was taken because she was a beautiful young lady. Esther had lived with her uncle all this time. She would only have been a teenager because by the late teens she'd all been married. The fact that they refer to her as a beautiful young virgin means that she was somewhere in her teens. And as a teenager, she's taken away and taken into the harem. No choice, no option in the matter. It happened to her. Okay. Now we know that in all things, God works for the good of those who love him. I don't think Esther thought that at the time. In fact, she was so terrified, she didn't tell anybody who she was or who her relatives were. She didn't mention about her uncle. She certainly didn't mention she was a Jewess. And she just went into the harem. Now, because of the person she was cooperative and friendly and kind. And she very quickly became one of the favourites of the eunuchs that worked in the harem, the people who actually run the place and so on. And so they actually treated her well. And before she could see the king, she had to go through a year's beauty treatment. No option, so she went through. But because of who she was, the chief eunuch actually took shine to her and gave her own rooms, her own handmaidens, and in fact started to treat her as a queen even before anything happened. But at the end of the year, the beauty treatment, she and the leader of the harem had got to know each other quite well. So he actually gave her a few tips about what to do when she was going to go and see the king. Okay. Now, the king was working his way through all these young virgins. So, as often as he wanted, one virgin would come in, they'd spend the night together, and then she'd go out. And if she'd pleased him and he actually thought, yes, I would like to marry this woman, then he would bring her back and announce that she was queen. And if, in the language of the Bible, she didn't please him, into the harem, that's it. There for the rest of her life. Remember, totally contained, harem, nobody else was allowed in. The only people they met were women or eunuchs. Never met any men. That was it. They couldn't travel anywhere, couldn't go anywhere. They had to stay within the harem for the rest of their lives. So, Esther went in, followed the advice of the chief eunuch, was the person she was, and was actually requested to come back. And she was appointed queen. So, as a teenager, she became queen of the largest empire in the world at the time. Okay? Now we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him. She never asked for the post. But no training for it. But there she was. What on earth is God doing? What's going on here? Now, Mordecai, we're not certain what job he did, but whatever he did, he brought him in contact with the palace on a regular basis. And he came across a plot to kill the king. And he reported it, and the people who were plotting to kill the king were taken away, and the plot was dealt with. And as a result of that plot, Mordecai actually got a job in the palace because he was around the palace gates. We know later on in Esther that he was in the palace area, so he must have been there for a reason. So Mordecai now is in the palace gates. Well, this guy called Haman, who was a noble, very rich man, became the king's number 2, one of his chief aides. Okay, and he had the world's biggest ego. Okay, this guy thought he was it. Now he probably thought he was better than the king, but he wouldn't have said that because he wanted his head. But he certainly regarded himself as very powerful. He had an incredibly big mouth as well, and he went around boasting about things. And the one thing that he loved was pomp, ceremony, and being shown that he was great. So he insisted that all the servants, anybody who was junior to him in the ranks of the palace staff, when he walked past, they had to bow to him. Just like they had to bow to the king. Okay. The problem was that whenever he walked past Mordecai didn't bow. So Haman gradually cottoned on. The first time he thought, well, that guy just didn't notice it was me. Second time, I'm Mordecai. I'm sorry, I'm Haman. Mordecai goes, yeah. Bam. No. So Haman realised that Mordecai was doing it on purpose. So, being the man he was, right, I'm going to kill him. I'll just execute him, get rid of him. Who is this Mordecai anyway? Tell me about him. So he found out that Mordecai was a Jew. Okay, so, because I'm so powerful, not only am I going to get rid of Mordecai, I'm going to wipe out all his people as well. So I'm going to kill his family, his friends. This is like the Italian mafia. I'm not just going to kill you, I'm going to kill your family, I'm going to kill your children. Yeah. Right? Arrogance at the extreme. So he plots to kill the Jews. He goes to the king. There's a certain race, terrible people in the provinces. I'd like to get rid of them. I'll even pay to get rid of them. The king says, oh, yeah, I trust you, Haman. Go and do what you want. So he writes a law, an actual law, that on the 20th of March, all the Jews, anybody who wants to, can kill a Jew and there's no comeback. In fact, the law is to kill them. And you can take possession of their property. You can have it. And it was sent out across the whole of these 139 provinces. Now at this time, the temple was being rebuilt. The Jewish nation was back, or some of them were back in Jerusalem. Can you imagine what happened when that edict went across? It says the whole world was in consternation, and the people in Susa, the capital city, were in consternation. Nobody understood what was going on. This is nearly 100 years after they'd been originally taken by Babylon. Loads of people have had families, and so we've got loads of Jews now. We're back to thousands and thousands of Jews. It's not a handful. And they're all wondering, what on earth is happening? An edict has just been passed. So this is Boris Johnson saying all Christians are going to be executed on the 20th of March. Now we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him. I bet the Jews didn't think that. They just cried out. I can't imagine what people would have done. I don't know what you and I would do. If that law was passed, we would try and get away. We would try and flee to the United States. How would we do that? Would we sneak out? I don't know. But they've got nowhere to go. Because this is all the countries. So this is a guy in charge of everywhere. So they pray. Now in all this, we could go, God, what are you doing? But he's put Esther in the right place at the right time to be the person he wants to use to bring about his will. He knew that Satan would be doing this plot. He knew what Satan wanted to do, to wipe out the Jews, so no Messiah, no salvation for the human race. Okay? That was Satan's plot. He was using Haman. But God had placed Esther at just the right spot, at the right time, using circumstances that she would not have enjoyed, but he works through everything. He can take bad things and bring good out of them. He would prefer to work through good, but if he can't, he will use whatever he needs to use. So, in that scenario, Mordecai gets a message to Esther, and there's lots of faffing around. But to cut a long story short, she agrees to go into the king. Now, for Esther, the reason why Esther's one of my heroes is because at this point, although she's queen, you must get out of your head the idea of the king and queen sitting next to each other and spending life together. They did not. She lived in one palace, he lived in another, and she was no different to the subject, except that at state ceremonies, he wanted something beautiful on his arm, a bit totty, he would wheel out his queen. And to be frank, when he wanted let's be blunt, sex, if he fancied Esther, then she would be called in. But apart from that, she had no say. In fact, if she chirped up, he would be told to shut up. Now, to go to the king without being invited, as you can imagine, the king didn't want 10,000 people at his door every day. To walk into his room without being invited, the penalty was death. It was a way of making sure that nobody came in uninvited. With one exception. If the king had his scepter, points it at you, then you're okay. So Esther, by this time, in her early 20s, has to go before the king of the whole world, knowing that unless he points the scepter at her, she will die. And unsurprisingly, she says, can we take 3 days to prepare, please? Can we pray and fast and so on? And so they all do. So the Jews, she tells Mordecai gets the Jews in Susa to pray and fast. Okay, he does it, she gets her colleagues, her harem people to do the same. And then she goes to the king. And the king points his scepter. And effectively, without going into a much more elaborate story, she tells him what's happened. And he responds by finding out, first of all, the first thing she does, let's be clear, is she has to tell the king she is a Jew. He didn't know. So she had to admit who she was. Secondly, she said, if you're going to put us all as slaves, that's okay. Please just don't kill us all. And the king loses his temper and executes Haman. He then goes to Esther and says, right, this man who's tried to kill you and your family and your family's family and friends and all the rest of it, right, you can have his lands. And she goes, well, I've got an uncle. Do you mind if he runs them? No. And at the same time, the king is reminded that Mordecai saved his life by exposing the plot. So he actually appoints Mordecai as a senior advisor. And Mordecai takes up a leadership role within his empire. And on we go. And the Jews are saved. And the reason the story's in the Bible is because the Jews at that time wrote it down because they set up a time called Purim, which was March 20th, March 21st, where they actually celebrate this salvation coming through. Now the whole salvation came from God. He moved his pieces. The people involved, Xerxes didn't honour God at all. Couldn't get it. Haman was just downright evil. Arrogant, egotistical. Mordecai knew God. and raised his daughter, or his stepdaughter in that way. Esther, well, she obviously knew him and God at the end, but whether she did it during the whole time when she was 16 and so on, and it all happened, it's a child. So God used all these circumstances, all this situation, to bring out his will. Now we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him. So actually, all the stuff that went on, Esther being taken into the harem, all of it, God still works his plan through. Now I'm not saying that he did all those things, because people did it. But he knows how to use circumstances. He is incredible. So, let's go back to my friend Dwayne. Now Dwayne's life, loads of people said, what a waste. He's died a young man. But I want to suggest, and it's not an original idea, loads of people have suggested it, that all our lives are like one of the threads in a tapestry. It wanders around. There might even be a few mistakes in there. But when it comes together into a picture that's meaningful and says something. But the only person who knows about the picture is the person making the picture. The thread doesn't. The thread just goes all over the place, and you end up with silly bits here and obviously breaks there and stuff. Now, in the hand of a skilled person, this is silk. They take the individual, for the camera. In the hands of a skilled person, this is what thousands and thousands of threads turn into. And this is an amazing thing. But this is made up of one piece, one thing, one thread. This is thousands of threads. Even on the back, I mean, this shows a real professional. When on the back you can't see any stitch mark. They're just all together. I don't know how much is machine, I don't know how much was hand. Now, that is the whole creation. And God is the person who's sewing this. And I actually don't know where we are. I don't know if we're here at the beginning. I don't think so. Are we here at the end? Are we just coming up to the tassels? Are we somewhere in the middle? But I bet some of those threads do some interesting patterns. I bet they don't just go in a neat line. And some of them will be short, some of them will be long, and some of them will be twisted, and some of them will be very straightforward what they do. And maybe for the thread, if the thread could feel, it might go, I don't want to do that. I don't want to be knotted in that way. I wish my thread was, I wish I was longer than that. I wish it was shorter than that. I wish my life was nice and straightforward like that. I wish I was white rather than green. But the person who's sewing the thing is making a pattern. Even if you make a mistake, even if something goes wrong, a true needlework can correct it, put it right. Can make it so that the knots don't matter, the mistakes don't matter. Now, God is that person. He is creating this. Something that will be beautiful, and we'll all look back on it and go, that is incredible. It is remarkable. And if we want to, we'll be able to go through and say, but that's where this terrible thing happened. That's where I fell downstairs. Jackie's fallen downstairs, broke bones. That's where Maura died. That's where this terrible thing happened. If we want to in the future. And when we step back, we will see it is something wonderful and beautiful, because he will have taken it and he will have woven it into something that's amazing. Now in all things, God works for the good of those who love him. But people say, but what about Dwayne? What about all the children that die? All the people that are close to me? All the pain? All the suffering? And God, I don't believe God killed Dwayne. But God used it. And the reason why we get upset is because we forget a very important thing. Dwayne's not dead. Dwayne's not dead. Dwayne's alive. Now, we might go, but he's been buried. He's been dead and buried for 30 years. Yeah, absolutely, but he's still alive. He is with Jesus now. Or he's in paradise. I mean, we can talk about that as a whole separate series. Right? But he still is alive. God is not the God of the dead. He's the God of the living. So even though Dwayne died at the age of 20, God had taken him, used him. And Dwayne is now enjoying himself. And one day, and unfortunately probably not in the too distant future now, because I'm getting older myself, okay, I'll be able to go up to him and go, "Hello, Dwayne! Been a while. It's been a long time since we've seen each other." And I'll be able to have a catch up. And I'll be able to say the same to my mum and my dad, and to Anna's parents. And I'll be able to have conversations with them all again. Because we forget that they are still alive. And our lives are not this short stay on earth. They are part of a much bigger picture, a much bigger plan. And this is only one shawl, and there's loads more of them. And I have no idea what God's got in store for us for the whole of eternity. We get trapped in this little story. Who knows what there is to come? Eye has not seen. He will show us what's to come. But through it all, God is working out his plan. And all God asks us to do is when we come to the knot, the challenge, we believe this. That's what we've got to do, because we have to be prepared to go with him, to follow the flow, to go with what's going on, to trust that. Now we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him. He is a good Father. He will not let us down. He will bring us through, and we will have one heck of a party one day. Okay? And then we'll go on to the next thing, which will be amazing. Right? And the hardships of this life will be put into perspective. Okay? God bless you. So let's pray now. So Father, I thank you for Esther. I thank you that in it all, despite being scared and inexperienced and all things, powerless in many ways, she followed you. And she took her courage. She prayed. She stood before you. And you gave her the ability to go into that king's chamber. She risked her life to save her family and friends. So thank you for it. And Jesus, we thank you that you died on the cross for us. That you went through all that. You went into death because you beat it. You rose again. Where, O death, is your victory? Where is your sting? We have life eternal now. And we're grateful. And I pray that when the going gets tough, as it regularly does, you will remind us of this and you will help us to believe. And one day we will celebrate with you.